Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope. This week comes as no introduction because, as we've been talking about for about 4 months now, almost 5 months now, we know that this is one of the biggest weeks of this year. And due to the events that we've seen on the news, it's going to be pretty obvious it's pretty obvious at this point. I do want to start by also saying I know I have a lot of followers actually in Ukraine and Russia. Praying for you guys. I think what's going on is absolutely crazy. But the other thing that I want to say with that is I originally posted my thoughts and opinions about it on my Patreon, and then I deleted it because the sound was super messed up. I'm going to make a different video and post it over my Patreon. So if you want my thoughts about the Ukraine, the Russian thing, and everything of the astrology about that, make sure you subscribe to my Patreon or my Patreon. As well, I've got monthly horoscopes there and some new stuff that I'm adding on too. So make sure you check that out. Help support the channel. But I want to preface this horoscope with the fact that we're playing with astrology. I seen a tweet flying around not that long ago about someone saying that they were concerned about the Pluto return of America and that they saw, this is going to, astrologers were saying that this and this was going to happen and that they were kind of freaking out. And I saw this commentary about how people were like, astrologers shouldn't fearmonger and that, there's this and there's that about, how do we talk about the future? And I've gotten to this point with this practice that if you're scared to look at the future, I think you're in the wrong hobby. And I think right now in this moment in time in history, this is a time where, we use astrology to validate, the internal world that we have that we feel, right? We use astrology to validate things that are going on inside of us, things that are going on outside of us. And when you see like extreme astrology that we have going on here, and you see extreme events going on in the real world, this is why we're doing astrology here for a reason, right? And I just want to say, this is a very serious practice in the sense where I think a lot of people got into it very casually, but just know we are playing with something very serious here, and we have the ability to look into the future. And it's pretty fucking crazy. And at times it's actually honestly scary as shit. But I think I'm prefacing this to say we're about to go into a really extreme week, as you could definitely see how things are playing out. So just don't, I don't want to say don't do anything. It's, this is an extreme week. There's a lot of big things going on in the world, and the astrology shows that, and the astrology will continue to show that. So again, I think if you are nervous to look at this stuff, I think you're in the wrong hobby. But I also think that, there's nothing really I don't want to say nothing really to worry about. I know, for example, I can't speak to every single person that watches this video because I have followers in Ukraine, and, what I'm saying today is going to not be exactly, what's on their mind or anything like that. I'm just prefacing this to say, there's a lot going on this week, and it's going to show up really, really big in world events. This is a really big world event week, and that is going to apply to your personal life. Now, I'm going to keep this really focused on the personal stuff this week, but the big stuff that's going on this week in the world is kind of insane, and that might affect a lot of us. One being the Pluto return of America. This is the beginning of the Pluto return of America. My quick 5-second thought on it is I just think it's going to be mostly monetary. I think as we have more sanctions on Russia, that's just going to kind of upend, America and the dollar being the world reserve currency. And I think pretty much oil and food prices and energy prices are still going to be up and down. And I think that's what's going to affect most of us. The big thing to really say with that too, as Americans, we've been really untouched for a very long time, and we've been very privileged to be, living a very peaceful lifestyle. And I truly believe that this war and these sanctions will upend a lot of security in our dollar or in our money. And whether it's Bitcoin or gold or the next thing, I don't know what the next thing is going to be. But I do think that, the powers that be, I think Russia challenging America, and I wouldn't be surprised too if China did it too. I think the Pluto return of America is that power kind of coming to a crumble. And that doesn't necessarily mean that another superpower is going to step up and immediately take the place. I think it's going to be a period of transition and a period of power loosening its grip. So this is the beginning of that, right? This is not a one-day event. This is a couple-year event that we're going to be going into. We're living through some history. So anyway, let's go ahead and get to the astrology and talk about how awesome this week is. Woo woo! Anyway, I'm not even going to go over the highlights because there's so much shit going on. I'm already 5 minutes into this, and this is going to be a very, very long horoscope. So buckle up. Monday, we start Monday off. Whoops, I should probably go to this. Monday, Moon is going to make a square to Uranus as it conjoins Mercury and Saturn. I think this is really just kind of talking about the moon making its way towards this new moon. It's getting into this dark moon phase. We're kind of bringing things to a close or bringing things to this concentrated lower point. And as the moon's in Aquarius, right, where there's this detached look at things, we're trying to, moon in Aquarius, it can be kind of stubborn. You kind of feel like you're on the outside or you're stuck. And I think as the moon is conjoining Mercury, right, Mercury's now at a shadow. It's also Mercury conjoining Saturn. Well, let's talk about the moon squaring Uranus first. I think the moon's going to square Uranus where as the moon's in Aquarius, we're detached from something. We're looking at things from a different perspective. That's probably going to, uproot some stuff. Uranus is destabilization, random occurrences. And the moon in Aquarius outside, squaring Uranus and Taurus it just seems like, doing something off the cuff or going against the grain or honestly just trying to continue something that may not even be working might have some, I don't want to say devastating effects, but Uranus is going to destabilize things. I think on Monday, if you're trying to keep things in this one perspective, it's not going, well, really the best way to look at it is like, for example, the Saturn-Uranus square. Like I said before, I really think what this war is going to end up doing is just, again, it's going to mostly like here, especially here for Americans, I think what it's going to end up doing is, energy, oil, food, all that stuff is going to be up and down for a long time. And that's something that's been happening, right? That's the Saturn-Uranus square, like infrastructure, commodities, shit like that. There's a lot of destabilization. And I think that's only going to continue. But I want you to think about that in terms of your personal life. For example, when Mars conjoined Saturn in Aquarius, March of 2020, we're going to be talking a lot about March of 2020 this week because there's a lot of repeating themes. But when March of 2020 happened and the lockdown started that week, that was the Mars-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. And what we saw was oil go negative. But now we have oil going over like $100 a barrel. And for you guys that don't, really care about that type of stuff, the big thing that I want to talk about here is there's this huge fluctuation with stability. And I think with this Aquarius and this Taurus stuff, the signs that are expecting stability, the signs that thrive on stability, do not have that luxury right now. So I look at, for example, Mercury in Aquarius, Saturn in Aquarius, and this moon in Aquarius, making these squares to Uranus, and that's going to continue for the next couple of years. Or I should say, really this next year. It's not necessarily something that we're done and over with. But especially too, Mars and Venus will be making square to Uranus a little bit later on too. But as the moon makes the square to Uranus and starts to conjoin Mercury and Saturn, the sense of there's going to be this unstable moment, but then later on Monday, the moon will conjoin Mercury and Saturn, where there's this trying to figure out the solution here. I do like the Mercury-Saturn conjunction of figuring out solutions, especially related to technology, community, communication. This will be a really interesting conjunction. Again, this is a really, really fucking big week. It's kind of overwhelming to be able to talk about each individual thing. But I will tell you on Monday, there is this sense of like trying to get a different perspective of the situation, that causing some disruption, and then ultimately a solution being figured out. It's moon conjoined Mercury and Saturn. But the solution is like, fuck. For example, I think about when it's maybe a good example of this. I can't really think of a good one at the top of my head, but maybe like, maybe you want an easier, I'm trying to think of a snow example. Like I've seen videos of people using a flamethrower to get the snow off their property, which is funny. But maybe you go to use a flamethrower to get snow off your property, but your flamethrower doesn't work, so you're stuck shoveling it. That's like this. This is like, I wanted to have a different way to go about it, but that solution didn't work, so I'm gonna have to do the more shitty solution, the regular solution. Anyway, that's Monday. We get to Tuesday, and on Tuesday, the moon is gonna go void. Now, this is what's super interesting about this week is there's moments of this like everything's happening all at once, and then nothing's happening. So just expect a lot of that this week. Like, well, I would also say too, for a lot of you that struggle with anxiety, that struggle with depression, this is something I literally had to delete Instagram. I am very, you guys know me, I'm super into geopolitics. I'm super into all this stuff. I can't do it anymore. I can't be on social media and just see everyone's opinions and all of this overwhelming stimulation. And I think if you're someone that struggles with that shit this week, this is a great week to get off of that stuff, because I just think this week has so much going on that it's going to be really easy to get wrapped up and overwhelmed with everything. And I think this would be a great week to concentrate on the things that you need to concentrate on. Focus on the things that you need to focus on, and find ways to get that stimulation out of there. Find ways to not be overwhelmed by everything, especially what's kind of going on in the news in the world right now. But as we go into Tuesday, the moon's going to go void and then enter Pisces as the sun is making a sextile to Jupiter. Or did I put Jupiter? I meant Uranus. I'm all over the place. This Mercury retrograde has been coming for my throat. Well, it's funny. I've had more Mercury retrograde issues as Mercury's been through its shadow and making that square to Uranus, which is super funny. Yesterday, I'm recording this on Friday, Mercury squared Uranus, and I tried to put a video on my Patreon, and my voice was all super messed up. The speed and the timing of everything. So that was a Mercury Uranus thing. Anyway, let's go into Tuesday. And the biggest thing here is the moon's going to be void for the majority of the morning. This is Pacific Standard Time, right? So in the East Coast, the moon's not even going to enter Pisces until like 3 p.m. The moon void in Aquarius is... it just reminds me of this one time my grandma used to pick me up from school, me and my sister. And there's just one time she just like forgot. Like she had like Alzheimer's and shit like that. And I remember as a kid, like... when your parents, like, I'm sure most of you have had like a moment where your parents forgot to pick you up or someone forgot to pick you up. And as a kid, you don't know. You're like, you don't know that that's a problem in that moment. You're just kind of like, why am I here? Like, that's very moon in Aquarius, like moon void at the very end of degrees of Aquarius. You're like alone and by yourself, and you know something's wrong, but you really don't know why or what it is. There's this kind of sense of like, and then like, I just remember my grandma pulling up, and it all made sense afterwards, but I wasn't questioning it at the moment. But this moon void in Aquarius, there's this sense of like, okay, I'm here. What's going on? What's next? And Tuesday is really weird. Tuesday has no feeling. Tuesday's really weird because, again, everything's happening on Wednesday. And the only thing that's going on is this moon's going to go void. And then it enters Pisces, right? Just a couple hours later here around 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, the moon's going to enter Pisces. And we have that dark moon phase, and we start the new moon phase. Again, new moons are about settling things out. That's why I'm also a little not worried about the Ukraine-Russian thing, only because I think things will get really intense for like 5 minutes, and then they might stop. But that also may not be that. They might stop because, again, well, sometimes fights escalate, and then they stop because things went too far. But I don't know yet. I was under the assumption, to be honest with you, last week, I didn't think last week would be as big of a week because I figured if Russia was going to invade Ukraine, it would have been when Mars and Venus conjoined Pluto. I was wrong about that. It makes me a little bit nervous as Mars and Venus encroach to Pluto, but, you know, we'll see. I've been pleasantly surprised before with astrology when it comes to the bad transits. So we'll see what it ends up being. But as the moon goes into Pisces and this new moon phase starts, things are settling out, and there's this focus on the Pisces stuff, right? And again, I can't tell you enough with this Pisces stuff, and I think this is what's so big that I think a lot of people are currently experiencing. Whether it's COVID, whether it's this fucking war, whether it's whatever the next 10 things that are going to happen are going to be, this Pisces stuff is like straight up, let's ignore it. Pisces stuff is finding this, you have to think of how people got through harsh conditions and hard times, right? Jupiter and Pisces, there's this sense of like sharing stories, being focused on what you can do, not being focused on, you know, the walls that are around you or being outcasted or whatever it is. And I think this new moon and this is not only a new moon in Pisces, but we're getting ready for the Jupiter Cazimi in Pisces too, where there's this level of kind of surrender. There's this level of acceptance. There's this level of, again, mutability, adaptability. The Pisces and the mutable signs are all about adaptation, which is really critical for human survival, right? Like it's as adapt, overcome. That's how we survive. And this is a period of adaptation, right? This is a period of we are going to have to change. And I look at this new moon in Pisces, sun in Pisces, there's a sense of like, you get to a point, well, here's a good way to look at it. I usually use like an addiction analogy is a really good one. But I remember with cigarettes, you get to, well, with a lot of things, you get to a point where you just don't even want it anymore. Like I remember with cigarettes, there was like, I told myself I wanted to quit, but I didn't. And then you kind of get to this point where like, I actually am over it. And that's what a lot of this looks like. I think, while all this extreme stuff is going on, there's also this like subtle, very calm energy with this Pisces new moon. So it's a weird fucking week this week, guys. But as the sun sextiles Uranus too, I've really been liking this Jupiter-Uranus sextile stuff that's going on. Again, it's kind of like, you never know what, I look at Pisces, like Jupiter and Pisces sextiling Uranus and Taurus is like, it's kind of like when you were a kid and you ever got like a Happy Meal and you got 2 toys instead of 1, and it was like, oh my God. I don't know. Back then it was a big deal. Nowadays it's like, kids have to have like a fucking iPad in order to be satisfied. But I just kind of look at this as happy accidents. New moon in Pisces focusing on change, the emotional state of change, right? Pisces. The thing I think about is like, if your emotions are involved in something and you are in an environment that is loud and chaotic and stressful, you are going to make stressful and chaotic decisions. Versus this new moon in Pisces, like you got all of this stuff going on here. Something that I used to do a lot more. I don't necessarily do it as much anymore, but before I ever made a really big decision, I used to eat a meal. I still pretty much do that too, because I don't like making decisions, or especially to something like a big decision. I like to be in the most emotionally calm state. And I really look at this new moon in Pisces as that's where you should be really focusing on, is trying to get to that state in order to handle this kind of stuff, right? It's like, when you're in a courtroom and you're battling someone and you are like, if you're in a courtroom and you're battling something super serious, you have to learn to control your emotions in order to get your point across, right? I think a lot of this is like controlling the emotional energy of all of this. Sun will sextile Uranus, so, I guess that's cool. I think there's so much else going on that I don't know how much that's really going to show up in everyone's day-to-day. But let's go ahead and move on to Wednesday. This is the big day. Let's go over everything here. Venus leaves shadow. Venus has been in the same fucking sign. So let's really rewind here for a second. Let's go back in time. Remember how I said, I was like, over the summer, you guys didn't even believe me. I was like, enjoy the summer. It's going to be really fun. And it's going to be a shitty winter. And a lot of you were like, Cameron, like, no, it's not. Venus went into Capricorn in November of 2021. November of 2021. That was 5 months ago almost. And Venus entered shadow November 18th, I believe, on that eclipse, that prenumeral eclipse. So Venus has been retrograde, has been in shadow and retrograde and then directed in shadow since the middle of November. Venus is finally leaving shadow. That's so we'll talk about it. Mercury will conjoin Saturn. I think that's the kicker, because the thing is, you have all of these planets that are doing things, right? But they're all... there is, for example, something can happen to you on a, let's say your bank. Something happens to you in your bank, but until you get that letter, until you get that notification, you don't know about that. And that's the Mercury-Saturn conjunction. I'm, of course, pointing at the chart. Should be pointing at this. Mercury conjoining Saturn is like definitely an announcement. So Wednesday is not, Wednesday is the day. Like, this is a big argument I've had of like, well, this is also why I kind of thought if Russia was going to invade, it'd be on Wednesday. But I think Wednesday it sounds like things will culminate to a very high point on Wednesday. Mercury's going to conjoin Saturn. We're going to be getting a message from an authority probably. It's also the new moon in Pisces, which just adds a whole nother layer of weird to it. But it's also Mars conjoining Pluto. Mars actually doesn't conjoin Pluto until late Wednesday night. And then Venus doesn't conjoin Pluto until Thursday morning, which I thought was kind of interesting, which is also interesting because technically here on Sunday, I don't know if you could see it here, Venus will actually pass Mars by the time they ingress into Aquarius. So remember how we said, Venus was leading Mars and then Mars passed Venus? Venus will pass Mars again once it goes into Aquarius, which is really interesting. But anyway, let's talk about Wednesday. So, there's really so much to say. This is the new moon in Pisces on top of Jupiter. Jupiter is an aversion to all of this shit. So there's 2 stories going on here, right? There's a hopeful, exciting, big new opportunity that's happening. My only concern is Jupiter conjoin Neptune. Try not to over-idealize it as much as you can. But, maybe we need that at this moment. The new moon, again, the new moon is where things are. We're focusing on one area in our lives. You have to look at what Pisces rules in your chart. Does it rule your 11th house of friends? Are you focusing on your friends? Does it rule your 8th house of shared resources and other people's money and like debt and taxes, where you're kind of like, again, like focusing on more of, again, shared resources, things that aren't yours? Are you focusing on work? What you have to figure out what house Pisces rules in your chart. And this is where, again, the energy is getting reset with the Jupiter stuff. So this is where you're going to see the good stuff happening, right? A lot of positivity happening. And this, not to say that everything else isn't necessarily positive, but it typically takes, everything else is at kind of an extreme point. Let's talk about, let's talk about Venus leaving shadow here for a second. Venus, let's go over what she rules. Value, love, relationships. Value is really the big thing. How do we connect? And in Capricorn, there's this sense of connecting through, well, like Capricorn is very like rules, boundaries, systems, regulations. And Venus's job is to kind of connect. And so, when there's boundaries, when there's walls, it can be kind of difficult to do that. So Venus has had to change her relationship to what boundaries are, what her rules are, especially how she plays within a certain framework of something. Venus, the way I look at it is Venus hit Pluto, where there was like a lot of realization of, what worked, what didn't work, where's power and fear controlling this Venus narrative in your life. Venus retrograded. We had this whole value shift occur. Venus station direct, where we were going all over it again, but this time Mars joined the team, where Mars is like, fuck yeah, we're going to do this. Mars was like, it's super funny. Now that I'm recording this, at the time when Mars entered Capricorn, I didn't necessarily feel it, versus now I'm like, oh, Mars has definitely been in Capricorn with Venus. Like, and it's definitely like, I feel like ramped up the whole Venus thing. Because there was this point where like, okay, our value is shifting here, but then Mars is like, we really are applying that. Mars is dragging Venus to conjoin Pluto. And like, this is why I made that analogy last week of like the personal development stuff and the breakthrough stuff. Like, it's not going to be easy to get to the other side. And sometimes you're going to have to be kind of dragged. But I think Venus leaving shadow is, you get what was a tantalizing fear or a big issue back in November and December, maybe even January. You're going to come back to that, and it's going to be nothing. And that is almost even more terrifying to me. Because here's the thing. There's so much, this is one of those things where whatever stopped you or wherever you shifted that value in November and December, based off that fear, based off that power, you're going to come back over that again. But this time there's so much else going on that you're not even fucking worried about it. You're going, like Mars and Venus are going to conjoin Pluto. This is the thing. Pluto makes the small things big and the big things small. We had the small things turn big where we're like, running, Venus on top of Pluto, fear, paranoia, what's going on, blah, 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 blah. Venus is going to hit Pluto and you're going to be like, this is I'm over this. This is nothing. Venus is leaving shadow though, where, and this isn't necessarily like, Venus is just leaving shadow and we get to move on. She's leaving shadow and immediately conjoining Pluto and Mars, like literally the two most extreme planets. So she doesn't have a choice in this case. Like, you don't have a choice but to get over it. Because it's one of those things where, let's say Venus retrograde on Pluto. Let's say, this isn't really a good analogy, but it's kind of like if you get robbed once, and it freaks you out. Well, I feel like there's a certain level of acceptance based off based off the scenario. And I just think Venus leaving shadow, what might have felt in that, I think in the moment of Venus leaving shadow, it's really hard to explain. Again, back in November, December, you hit, like, Venus hits Pluto. There's this relationship change to fear and power. And, as Venus is coming back to that, it's not really about Venus hitting Pluto, and it's not really about your relationship to fear and power. It's more about Mars and Pluto, which is like, what are you fighting for? Like, what is your energy drive. This is Mars's exalted degree, by the way. It's like 27, 28 degrees Capricorn. This is that, well, again, I don't even think this is about Venus leaving shadow and Venus hitting Pluto. It's about this Mars-Pluto stuff. It's you don't realize how much you've changed until you're on the other side of something, right? Like Venus conjoining Pluto, yes, that's going to be a really big deal, but I think we're going to be so into this Mars stuff and that Mars conjoining Pluto of just like fucking powering through everything that, well, let's talk a little bit about Mars. So Venus is leaving shadow, right? We've had this whole relationship change. Now Venus is finally treading new ground, but she is still with Mars conjoining Pluto, where there is this like, all right, you got through this 99% of things, you built up to a 99%. Venus station retrograde on Pluto. We moved backwards. Now we're building up, and then once she hits that 100%, moves on to the next thing. It's Mars conjoining Pluto. This is like, it's really powerful. I don't know how I feel about it all the way for everybody, but let's talk about Mars conjoining Pluto. Mars fights, anger, war, attacking. Pluto. I'm a little bit concerned about this with the whole Russia thing and how they just took Chernobyl, but that wasn't on my cards. Like I did not see that one coming, so I don't know what that's going to look like. And rather than me being like, oh, this is what it's going to look like, I can tell you guys. I mean, Pluto does rule plutonium and nuclear stuff. What that looks like, I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know. Now with like nuclear bombs and stuff like that, Pluto's come up, but I know like Drew Levanti, he's told me about some research he's done on it, and it's mostly like Moon Saturn stuff. So I'm not really worried about because I know some people are worried about like nuclear stuff with the Pluto. And if there is some type of thing where that happens, it's Wednesday going to Thursday morning. But let's be realistic here. I think Mars conjoining Pluto, though, on this personal level, is things getting to an extreme, things being turned up to a notch. This is Mars in Capricorn, right? Like, what are you working for? What are you, earning? What are you fighting for? And as Mars conjoins Pluto, it's mostly facing fear. It's mostly facing fear, and it's mostly facing power. And I think Mars Venus conjoining Pluto is like, there's this level of how, like, if you have gone so far for something, are you going to stop at the last step? The other thing too is Mars and Venus are in Saturn signs, and Mercury's conjoining Saturn here. There's so much clarity in this situation. It's insane to me. Mercury conjoining Saturn. Mercury's about messages, communication, understanding, thinking, and it's on top of Saturn, right? This is reality. This is what is real. Saturn rules authorities. So Mercury conjoining Saturn, you're probably going to be hearing something from an authority. Mercury conjoining Saturn, you're probably going to be hearing a message that's like super hardcore. Like this is March 2nd again. This is a huge day, I think, in the world in general. And this is also the beginning of America's Pluto return. And again, what I think that really looks like is just the power of the dollar crumbling, and I don't really know what's really next, to be honest with you. I've been trying to keep up with it, and I just don't know. Everything's everywhere. Again, new moon in Pisces, so things are changing, right? Like new moon, we're looking at one area, and it's a mutable sign. We're switching it up. Mars conjoining Pluto with Venus conjoining Pluto is we're taking things to an extreme point. I think the other thing too is like, try not to like let things get the best of you. Cause like when you have this Pluto stuff, it's like, it's just going to be really easy for anger and aggression and frustration to literally be like visceral, like all encompassing. Like if you are someone who's got like a really like a sensitive person, like this is not your day. This is a great day to check in with your sensitivity and to not be overwhelmed. But Mars conjoining Pluto, Venus conjoining Pluto, like, I could sit here and say, yeah, it is going to be scary, right? Facing fears is scary. But again, I think with Mars and Venus, when you're in the heat of the moment, like it doesn't even fucking matter. Like the idea of doing something is oftentimes much more scarier than actually doing it. Thinking about doing something is scarier than actually doing it. And when you do the thing, you actually realize how insignificant it was the whole time. And I think that's really the MO of this. But I just kind of think it's almost overwhelming. And And it's a big deal. I think it's hard to, I don't understand how people could do astrology and not be like side by side with personal development. It doesn't make any sense to me. But this really is like, that Venus on top of Pluto, a lot of people have been dealing with fear. A lot of people, Pluto also rules governments and, institutions and corporations. So again, this is what's so hard about just saying, it's just a Mars, it's not just a Mars-Venus-Pluto conjunction. It's also the Pluto return of America, which is the superpower of the fucking world right now. And that's, again, there's so many things that, like world markets, money, governments, that affects people's day-to-day lives. So there's a level of that's happening here that I can't necessarily go into. But I think, again, on this personal level, Mars conjoining Pluto, Venus conjoining Pluto, you're going to have to face a fear. And I think this Mercury conjoining Saturn part of it is just a lot of, again, we've had this Mercury retrograde here too. Since the end of December, we're already into fucking March and we're still dealing with shit from November, December, and January, right? And I think Mercury conjoining Saturn again, this is all kind of a low point. And I think Mercury conjoining Saturn is, we're going to be hearing from an authority. We're going to be understanding this Aquarius stuff, right? Inside the wall, outside the wall. The Aquarius stuff is too like Aquarius 2 is going to be ruling like things like technology, again, communities and things like that. And I think what's more important though is Mercury's conjoining Saturn while this Mars, Venus, Pluto conjunction is happening in a Saturn ruled sign. So it just seems like all of the attention is here on this, taking things to an extreme, moving past stuff. It's really not that big of a deal. And I think also just in the heat of the moment, there's so much that's going on that it won't feel like that big of a thing. It's again, I just think about, I think about people's breakthrough stories and what people have had to overcome. And I think about how I think about the gigantic things people have overcome that are much bigger than anything I've experienced in my life. And, they just talk about it like it's nothing. Because to them, once you get over to the other side, it's not that it's not nothing. It's that you overcome so much and it becomes something little. So I don't know. That's what I really look at with this. It's like, I think if Venus was just leaving shadow with Pluto, it'd be like, okay, this is going to be scary, but this is what we did. But like, this is Mars. This is Mars conjoining Pluto. I think if you are scared, it's going to look like how a bear gets scared, and it's going to look like it's going to fucking maul you to death. Like there is scared where you run away, but then there is scared where you literally go beast mode and you turn into a vicious grizzly bear and you attack whatever's in front of you. Eyes roll back into the back of your head like a shark. That's kind of what this is. And maybe you guys need to do that. Maybe there's some of you that again, a lot of this is taking things to an extreme, getting over a lot of fears, and Mars conjoining Pluto too. I can't emphasize this enough. For the people that get really oversensitive with stuff, this is really going to bring up a lot of that, like overwhelming sensitivity, whether that's, anxiety or whatever it is. So just try to really remain calm and emotionally present. Cause I think this is body language is really important. And I think about court cases and how people's emotional reactions to things totally just fuck up everything that they've done. So I think this is a really big day to just put on your game face. Get really serious. Know that you are going to address this Pluto stuff, fears, trauma, all of that shit, right? It has to do with this Capricorn stuff. Things again going to an extreme. And I just think with Mercury conjoining Saturn too, this is a bottom, in my opinion. This is a bottom. My only problem with this is when you talk about the geopolitical stuff. I think again, I was thinking that if Russia would invade, it would have been this day because this makes sense to me. But what I don't like about this now is I think if the war escalates, this will be the absolute tipping point, and I think it'll stop after this. To be honest with you, if it continues, that would be kind of wild. But I also think I get a little bit worried of these extremes that things are going to get taken to. And that's the hard part with the Pluto stuff is what extreme do we take it to, right? When it comes to, even self-defense, I think a lot about this when it comes to the self-defense world. There's such a gray area between self-defense and let's say someone's robbing you. I don't know if you guys know this, but if someone breaks into your house and you shoot them, if they are heading out your door and they are trying to escape, technically that's like, I think, first degree murder, or I forgot what degree it is, but it's not defense at that point. It's murder because they were trying to escape, which is, when you have those moments where, someone's breaking into your house and, like, let's say you shoot them, like, that's a Mars Pluto moment. It's everything is, you're not even thinking, like, you're in that moment. You are reacting to that moment. And it's those little tiny things that really matter, that really turn into a big thing. That's what I look at with this. So I think for a lot of people, the big thing is to not react, it's to respond. But that response needs to be like Mars conjoining Pluto. I think there's going to be this overwhelming sense of addressing something. But you also have to know, well, for example, if someone's robbing you and, let's say someone breaks into your house and you've got a gun, you shoot them, you got to know when to stop. And I think that's the Mars Pluto thing, is knowing when to stop, knowing when to, like, I don't know. It reminds me of, like, this is like a check, I think is a good way to put it. Knowing when to stop, you could take things to an extreme. Like, for example, it's like with fights. In a fight, a typical respectable fight, typically, someone gets the shit beat out of them, and there's typically a point where you stop. And then with guys, like, most guys who've been to fights, like, it's like, okay, at a certain point you go, like, all right, stop. Like, if someone's winning a fight and they just fucking continue to kick the shit out of them, it's like, all right, you're taking it way too far. And it's not cool at that point. That's really the weird line about Wednesday, is there's Mars conjoining Pluto. It's going to get turned to an extreme in that moment. It's like, it's the same thing with, like, cops. Like, it's so funny to me how cops just absolutely unload clips on people. It's, you don't want to hear my opinion about cops. Mars conjoining Pluto, you can't take it, like, you have to know what is the appropriate defense. You have to know what is the appropriate attack. And, it's going to be really easy to take things to an extreme. And there's a necessity for that. For example, there are moments where you have to use, like, in self-defense. Well, for example, with, like, for cops, for example, there are moments where they have to use a gun and they got to pull it out. But at what point, do they unload a clip on someone who's unarmed? At what point do you stop? And that's the difference between, remaining a cop and going back to work the next day versus going to prison. That's what I look at with this Wednesday stuff. So, like, I know I'm just riffing on this, but, like, there's this point where you have to face fears and you have to do something that maybe you don't want to do, but you also have to be responsible on what level you take it to. This is Mars's exalted degree on Pluto. Like I'll tell you this much. I'm going to be working so hard. I'm going to be killing it during this time. Maybe I'll take it to an extreme. I don't know. But this Mars-Pluto conjunction, it's just so important to know that line. I think about The Iron Giant. If you've never seen The Iron Giant, it's one of my favorite movies as a kid. But he's got this, in The Iron Giant, it's this big giant. He's made of iron. Shocker. Pretty much, he has this bump in his head. He's really nice. Then the bump comes out, and he's like this attack robot from a different world. And, like, that's Mars-Pluto conjunction. And, like, the bump comes out because his, like, friend almost gets hurt, and he, like, fucking just tries to destroy the world because his friend gets hurt. That's very Mars conjoining Pluto here, especially with, like, New Moon and Pisces. It's like, sometimes you'll see a character, it's like they're really soft and innocent until, like, something bad happens, and then they take it to an extreme. That's Wednesday. So Wednesday's a really complicated day. Well, the other thing is too is that this is world events, right? You think about stuff like COVID, and this is the other thing too. To continue off what I said in the beginning, I figured this, like, when I've been doing astrology for like 5 or 6 years now, and it really hit me around the lockdowns how literal astrology can be. That Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that Mars-Saturn conjunction, and we literally saw all supply lines stop. The whole world shut down. It took me about a year to recover from that, of going, oh, astrology is really fucking real and symbolic. And just like we can shut down the world in 5 seconds, I look at this Mars-Pluto conjunction of, this may not even be about what you're going on in your personal life. This could even just be about what's going on in the world, to be honest with you. So Again, I think the biggest thing here is you're facing a lot of fears. We've had this whole Venus retrograde, but instead of Venus just being out of shadow hitting Pluto, it's Mars. It's how far are you taking that though? And at what point needs to stop and what point needs to go? Mercury hitting Saturn, I think you're going to know what that limit is. Saturn's that roof, that ceiling. Mercury is understanding that. And this is that new moon in Pisces. It's time to move on. I just think there's this level of like, I don't know, or maybe like, have you like not let things get to you for a long time and then you finally let it get to you, but by the time you let it get to you, it's time to move on from it? That's a lot of this. There's a really complicated Wednesday. To be honest with you guys, it's really hard just trying to wrap it up here in one thing. So just Wednesday, just know it's all going down. Then we get to Thursday. I need to continue on because we're like 40 minutes into this horoscope. Then we're going to get into Thursday. Venus is going to conjoin Pluto that morning, which is way different than Mars conjoining Pluto. But the moon will also conjoin Neptune and they'll sextile Venus and Mars before the moon goes into Aries. So here's the thing. On Thursday, that Venus hits Pluto. And that happens that morning where I'll tell you this. As a young man, as a young boy, I should say, when I got into fights in school, there's a certain level of coming into yourself, I think especially as a young boy, when it comes to like fighting and defending yourself, where, you know, I don't really advocate violence. You guys should know that. We're in fucking we're astrologers here. But there is this level of, I remember there's some fights that I'd get into, and then like after I handled it, it was really extreme. I go like, I had proved something to myself I didn't have an opportunity to prove before. And I look at Mars hitting Pluto, and I remember I've been in a lot of fights in school. I remember this one fight where it was like, typically, I remember it was always like, every time I got in a fight in school, it was always like predestined. It was always pre-planned, except for this one time. This kid had said something, and we just went fucking at it, like out of nowhere. And it was like one of the first fights I've ever been in that was like, it was just like in the moment. It was super crazy. And at that moment, like usually flights are like planned and that turns into like a whole bunch of drama and whatever. And at that moment, I just remember after that had happened, well, this is something too. I think about the astrology, not even the astrology community, but just the spiritual world in general is very passive. It's very pacifist and doesn't really like anger or negativity. And I used to be very like, oh, negative people are bad. Some of the most respectable, the people that get the most respect from me are people that can absolutely show their anger and frustration and get it out and then immediately move on from it. And I look at this Mars, Venus, Pluto conjunction. It's like Mars hits Pluto, right? You're just going to be eyes rolling in the back of your head, bear moment, right? And then Venus conjoins Pluto where you go like, damn, like that kind of felt good. Like when I got in fights at school, like don't get me wrong, when I got the shit beat out of myself, it was not fun. I got the shit beat out of myself so many times. But when you win a fight and you overcome it, you go like, it feels good. This is the whole thing I've talked about with Pluto. Like Pluto rules power, but power feels good. It really does. A lot of people like, again, I think the astrology community is so into this, like, again, negative is just bad and, you know, bad. And it's like, you need to feel power. You need to feel that because like, that's the thing that's going to get you to your next, you know, if I didn't have, you know, I look at it's just like getting in a fight in school. I needed that for myself to understand that I can do things and to have that value shift. And I got over it for the fear too. I think, I remember as a kid, I mean, as adults still do this. Like no one wants to get hurt or get punched in the face, right? But then when you actually have it happen to you, same thing with breaking a bone. I've broken so many bones or crashed on my bike and I've hit my head so many times that you kind of get over it at a certain point. And it's not that you don't not like it, you still don't like it, but there's this sense of it's empowering, it's refreshing. Or for example, here's maybe a very chill version of this is the Wim Hof method. Like for me, I don't do Wim Hof. I don't, my grandparents worked their asses off and that generation worked their asses off to provide hot water to me and I'm going to use it. But I think of the Wim Hof method where maybe like I hate that cold water stuff, but I'm like a Leo. But for some people, like that just sounds super uncomfortable. And I have a friend of mine who he literally bathes in like ice river water. Like he literally goes out into the river in the snow in like Denver and like bathes in it. Super crazy. But that's empowering, right? You kind of face this and it's just a small thing. It's just cold water, right? And I just think by the time we get to Thursday, this is like, You know, it feels fucking good. It feels good. It feels good. It really does. And as much as things are different and they've changed this, I think this level of addressing like Venus and Capricorn, right? Especially like a boundary, like a rule or something like that. That's why I brought up that fighting analogy. It's like, you know, especially if you've ever had the shit beat out of you, like a lot of you have, and you are able to do that. Like if you ever got in a fight and you were able to do it, there's this level of going like, oh wow, like, I don't know. It just changes your perception of things. And I think as Venus hits Pluto, again, Mars hits Pluto first, where it takes the, you know, eyes rolling in the back of your head to overcome that fear. But then Venus hits Pluto and you go, oh, that kind of felt good. It's kind of cool. It's like a tattoo. I think of like tattoos, like some people get so scared. Like I've had people be like, oh my God, did that hurt? It's like, well, duh. But like, there's this level of like, when you first get a tattoo, like it hurts, but then you kind of go like, I kind of liked that. Like that was kind of like fun feeling it. Yeah, I'm weird. The moon's going to conjoin Neptune, though, and it's going to sextile this Mars-Venus stuff, which is cool. But as the moon conjoins Neptune, I think what's important about this whole week is having space for you to, like, decompress. Because I think while all this extreme stuff is going on, like, you don't have all this extreme stuff and then, like, go into meetings and go into work. Like, this is, like, have some space for things. But I think the moon conjoining Neptune, also really romanticizing the situation. Like, you're going to be like, fuck yeah, I did that. Woo. Moon's gonna moon sextiling Venus and Mars on top of Neptune is like euphoric, in my opinion. With this Pluto stuff, like that Pluto is that, I think about when Pluto went over my ascendant, me and my family, we got in a whitewater rafting accident and we almost, you know, I could say we all almost drowned. We didn't. My stepbrother and our pastor was with us, which is very Pluto and Sag. They almost did. But I just remember when we flipped, I don't know if you've ever been in like a drowning incident, but it's really fucking intense and scary. And I think about that incident and how much, I don't know, that just changed everything in a lot of different ways. I think in my perception of how I related to even just like water or nature, it's overwhelming. It's visceral, the Pluto stuff. It really is. The Pluto stuff it's so in your face. It's those extreme moments. So again, I don't think this is a small week at all. That's why I said last week wasn't that big. And I saw someone comment, they're like, yeah, talk about nothing going on this week. And I was like, well, that doesn't make me feel better that something did happen, because that makes me more nervous about the big week that we have coming up. Anyway, the moon's going to enter Aries after that. And I think as the moon enters Aries going into Thursday evening, there's much more of like okay, check in. You just did that. That just happened. Now, like, okay, like, whoa. And then like, have you ever, like, well, it's the same thing. It's like when you do something, again, the fight is the best analogy I give it. I hope some of you have gotten into fights in school, or at least gotten to at least one fight in school, can understand what I'm saying here. Because I feel like there's this moment of like, oh yeah, you just got into a fight and you just like won. And there's this kind of like, whoa, like not Danny Tanner, who I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of Tim Allen of Tool Time. And then the moon goes into Aries, where you kind of go like, okay, like now what's up? This is also, by the way, the fucking Jupiter Kazemi. I mean, Mars and Venus are still conjoining each other. Moon goes into Aries, you kind of snap out of it, and it's much more of like, I remember this one fight I got into in high school, and it was literally like, we knew we were going to fight each other, and then we saw each other, we were going to fight after school, but then we saw each other during passing period, and we just fucking went at it, like, no questions asked. We just saw each other straight on sight. It was a funny fight. But I just remember literally some teacher broke it up and I didn't even like bat an eye. I just left and walked straight to class. And it took me like 5 minutes to like get out of it. I was like late to class. My teacher's like, where were you? And I was like, I got in a fight. And nothing happened. And then my next period, I ended up, you know, going to the principal's office and shit like that. But that moon in Aries, it's just like, the analogy I'm trying to say here is I got into this fight and then I immediately went off to the next thing. That's the moon in Aries. It's like, okay, that's done. You address that, move on to the next thing. And I think that's the biggest thing about this week too, is we've just been dealing with this for so long. Like, I don't even feel bad this is 50 minutes. We have more to talk about because, well, this is just a really big fucking week. And it's also just hard to talk about with, this is 4 or 5 months in the making. We have all this geopolitical stuff going on. It's all types of shit everywhere. So anyway, then we get to Friday. Moon's going to conjoin Chiron, and I don't really talk about Chiron that much anymore. But I'm bringing up, Sun's also going to conjoin Jupiter, but that's a 2-day thing. I'm only bringing up the Moon conjoining Chiron on Friday because, like I said earlier, this week is like it's like everything's happening or nothing's happening. And Friday, literally nothing is happening, in my opinion. Moon is going to conjoin Chiron, and it's not even going to be aspecting anything. In fact, the Moon is void. No, it's not void. The Moon will make a sextile to Saturn and Mercury, but that won't be till Saturday. But this is all the Moon conjoining Chiron and Aries. I have a whole video about Chiron and Aries, about being the wounded or the healed warrior type thing. And I think this Moon on top of Chiron is really like that self-assertion. You have to think of Aries, right? The spark, the initiation, the confrontation, the ambition to start and begin, and that liveliness of wanting to create, like that Moon, our emotions being invested in that Moon in Aries, right? How we feel being reflected by our actions, by our engagement. And it's on top of Chiron. There's a sense of like healing again. Well, and Chiron is not like, oh my God, I'm healed. It's like, I always think of Chiron is like, for example, I have 12 screws and 2 plates in my arm. I'm healed technically, but it came out of I have 12 screws and 2 arms. This was not a fun process getting this done. And it's also, hurts a lot, like in a lot of situations. So the wounded healer of like, we could fix you, but at a cost. And there's going to be some pain involved in it. I'm fixed though, that Moon on top of Chiron. It's one of those things, right? I think of like a school fight. It's like, yeah, sure, you might have got a black eye, but like you stood up for yourself. Yeah, sure, you might have gotten scraped or bruised, but you did the thing. And I just look a lot at this as, because again, this is stuff from November. And we have been stuck in this fucking area for like 4 or 5 months. And it's going to feel really refreshing being on the other side of all of this stuff. It really is. It might take a second, but it will be. And I think as the Sun conjoins Jupiter, being the Jupiter Cazimi, my only hard thing about this is Neptune's here and it's kind of in the way. It's like, I like it, but it's also like not that important. The Sun conjoining Jupiter and this Jupiter Cazimi is really refreshing this Jupiter energy. And again, I think we're really going to be like feeling this Jupiter energy. What is Jupiter energy? Expansion, abundance, hope, faith, gratitude. But it's in Pisces. It comes from changing the story, being forgiveful, like being more open and honest and surrendering to the moment, right? The difference between like Jupiter and Sagittarius is like, oh, like, the next thing and the next thing is the grass is greener on the other side versus, and this is something I've talked about. I tried to talk about in that video, but that video got messed up of, things typically come out of necessity. Change comes out of necessity. Innovation comes out of necessity pretty much. And I look at this as, this is coming out of necessity. It's not like, oh my God, things are great. Woo. It's like things are turning positive because of like, for a reason, meaning you've got all of this shit going on here. The Sun conjoining Jupiter is like, all right, now that we're over that, it's time to look at things through a different perspective, have more hope, have more belief in the future, but it's going to take this change in perception. It's going to take this change in understanding your environment. And while all of this, also too, we're about to have like Mars and Venus go into Aquarius, which totally changes the picture. I think again, Mars and Venus hit Pluto. We overcome a bunch of stuff. By the time we get to here, that Sun Jupiter Cazimi, we're feeling the change at this point. The change is real. The internal change, the external change, it's very real. And what is that change, right? Jupiter and Pisces. Straight up, it's moving on to other shit. I think Jupiter being an aversion to the Saturn stuff is like, well, I think about the Spanish flu and how like historians are like, there's not a lot of stuff about the Spanish flu. Yeah, they didn't want to talk about it after like this COVID stuff, even though it's going to be affected for ever, to be honest with you, no one's going to want to talk about it for a while. And I just really think this Pisces stuff is like literally anything but what is going on. Literally anything. Like, that's why I said, like, I can't even, like, I'm trying to be on social media to be more social with like people I'm actually friends with. But it's like, I can't even do it anymore. I straight up can't even do it. I don't even, like, I want to be into the geopolitics stuff, but I can't even do it anymore. I don't even give a fuck anymore. It's been way too much going on. But that brings us to Saturday. Moon is going to sextile Saturn and Mercury during the Jupiter Cazimi too. So Friday's weird. Friday's like a very like, I think, realizing and taking in the energy versus Saturday is Moon in Aries sextiling Mercury and Saturn. During still Jupiter will still be Cazimi pretty much for that whole day. This is like you are going to walk around with a much bigger strut, in my opinion, like a much more pep in your step. The one thing I want to point out too is Mars and Venus are on each other. Again, I've talked about this Mars and Venus conjunction. It's sexy. It's hot in the sense of like, it's sexy, really. Yes, the Pluto conjunction is like, well, I'm trying to think of like a corny ass Marvel movie, where it's like hero defeats the villain and then gets the relationship and they're in love. That's kind of like this in a weird way. Maybe not exactly for everybody, but Mars and Venus are still in top of Capricorn. I mean, it's still sexy. I think this moon sextiling Mercury and Saturn is kind of understanding and putting the two and two together of like, okay, you just did that. That feels really good. When, when you overcome one thing in your life and you install that confidence and that's done, right? You have that confidence that you've done that. What is it like to apply that to other areas in your life? It's like, for example, if you have never, what's a good example of this? Like if you're someone who's got like insecurity around like talking to strangers or like picking up women or just literally engaging or talking with someone. And then it's like you do something out of necessity, right? Maybe you got to like, God, the other day I had someone knock on my door like trying to sell me something and I was just like, get me the fuck out of here. I can't stand that shit. But I think about people who don't want to like engage with people on the outside. Someone knocks on your door and it's like you have to engage with them. I look at this as like, once you do the thing that you didn't want to do and you install the confidence that you did that, you're going to see that manifest into other areas of your life. You really will. Like if you can accomplish one feat in one area, well, what does that mean for the other areas that you need to accomplish in your life? If you can get over one fear in your life, again, it's like if you can get over, well, it's the same thing. I'm as a moon in Libra, Saturn in Aries, I've had a very difficult relationship with peace and like violence. And I remember as a kid, I was bullied a lot and there was a lot of situations where I had to defend myself, but I was always told, I'm a Libra moon. My mom always told me like, can't fight, you're going to get in trouble. And I had, no matter what, I was like the loser. I either had the shit beat out of me or when I would get into a fight and stand up for myself, I'd get in trouble at home. So it didn't really work. But there are so many times where I'm so glad I stood up for myself because there's moments where I was a kid where if I didn't stand up for myself as a kid, if I didn't do whatever the fuck I wanted to, as an adult, I would have suffered the ultimate price. I would have paid the ultimate price for not standing up for myself then. And I just think about what you might be afraid of in this moment. Think about the cost. This is something I'm talking to you guys as a human. Like I am not perfect in any fucking way. And a lot of you guys, I don't know, think that I am or think that I am because of the YouTube, parasocial relationship thing. It's kind of like, again, when you prove something to yourself and you overcome something, and you look at where you could apply that in your life, and you could realize you can look back and say, well, there's the times in your life where you could say that I stood up for that and that means something. Where can I go from here? But then there's times in your life where you can look back and you could say, I should have said something. I should have stood up for myself. I shouldn't have been a bitch. I shouldn't have cowered away. And I look at a lot of this as like, it's going to be really easy to, again, if I hadn't stood up for myself as a kid, there's a lot of times as an adult, I needed that. Like I needed those tools and those experiences as a kid as tools as an adult. And this is one of those times where I don't want you to think of things in the moment. I want you to think of things in the future. And are you going to regret doing something or are you going to regret not doing something? And that's a personal decision. But I look at this as if you are going to let the fear and the power over control you, then that means you're setting the precedent for later on in your life. What else are you going to let control you? Well, if this fear can get to you, what other fears can get to you? What other shackles and chains will you willingly put on? I think so much about the Devil Tarot card and how the chains on the guy and the girl in the Devil Tarot card, they can take them off. And this Mars Pluto stuff is, where are you going to say, here's my chain, here's my shit. I am too much of a bitch to overcome this. And again, now you're just setting the precedent for later on. Or, you might have to, you might get a black eye, you might get scraped, you might get bruised. Are you going to stand up for something because you might need to stand up for something later? And that's a hard decision. There's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong answers with this stuff, guys. But I think as the sun conjoins Jupiter, what I see after this Mars, Venus, Pluto stuff is you get to the other side, and I think it's really clear what just happened. You either succumb to that pressure, that fear, or again, eyes roll back to the back of your head and you just blacked out and went through it anyway. I would kind of suggest just blacking out and doing it anyway, knowing when to kind of stop. But, this moon sextile Mercury and Saturn is just really understanding that. Really, it clicks at this point where you go like, oh shit, wow, okay, it's like I just stood up for that. I just overcome that. Now what? Now what's possible? Now what can I do? Again, I think personal development's important because I think in this world, it just wants to beat and exploit the shit out of you. And I think if you let that happen, you are vibrating at a lower frequency, at a lower energy. And because we're social creatures, you are affecting other people. And I think if your energy is lower, you're giving that to other people. And so you're the asshole. Not what happened to you. You are. I know people that have had, I know so many people had there's moments where I'm a bitch, where I go like, oh, my life sucks, blah, 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 blah. And then, you hear someone else with other people's problems. You're like, I got it fine. I got it good. This is just, again, one of those things of, I wouldn't let yourself, don't bitch out on this. You got to overcome a lot of stuff. And then it's on to the next thing, really. Let's go ahead and go into Sunday. So Sunday is also another really big day. This is a really big week. This is, again, I keep saying this is the longest horoscope I've done, but this is a really big week. I can't emphasize this enough. We get into Sunday, and now what's actually interesting, I was watching, stop. There we go. Let's go backwards. I thought this was super interesting. Let's check this out. Let's check it out. You guys watch Steve Brule? Watch this. So Mars and Venus, they're by the way, on top of each other. It's been super beautiful. I've been waking up at 4 a.m. Go outside and you see Venus as morning star and you see Mars just a little bit under it. It's really nice and pretty. You should, if you wake up super early before sunrise, you should definitely check out Mars and Venus. They're right on top of each other at 29 Capricorn, about to ingress. The moon will be applying to a square with Mars and Venus all day on Saturday. But it's not until... See, watch this. So this is the other thing. So 55, 56, moon's at 28. Then we get to 9 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So that means it's already Sunday and on the East Coast. And before the moon completes that square to Mars and Venus, it edges it the whole time. See, 2906, 2959, 2959. Before that moon completes that square, Mars and Venus ingress into Aquarius. So 11, Saturday going into Sunday is a very different energy, by the way. Now notice Venus crosses over Mars within that same hour. So late on to Saturday night. So if you're partying Saturday night, you'll feel this. Venus will go literally past Saturn as they both ingress into Aquarius, which is super interesting to me because I think Mars was dragging Venus through this Capricorn shit. And then it's Venus is going to start dragging Mars through the Aquarius shit. And that's just, I don't know, that's just funny to me. And then, Mars and Venus going into Aquarius, guys, Mars, Saturn conjoined, there's, I don't know. I wish I could tell you, I just don't know. Something to do with COVID though. I know that for sure. Or the vaccines, one of the two. Mars, Saturn conjunction was lockdowns. Jupiter, Saturn was the vaccine. Mars and Venus, there's a continuation of that at some point. I have no idea what it's going to be because everything just keeps throwing me a curveball. And then, Pluto will also go into Aquarius and we'll see more of that. But Mars and Venus going into Aquarius, we're on the other side. We're on the other side. Like I said, Aquarius is you're either inside or you're out. And if you're plugged into the system, there are rules that you have to live by. If you are unplugged from the system, you have to there are also realities and rules you have to live by, which are very different. And while you might not be limited, you are constrained. Like you are not limited by an authority, but you are constrained with your resources. So the thing is, Mars and Venus go into Aquarius. Well, this is the thing. I think this is the point where I'm trying to think of it as like I'm trying to think of like group activities I've been in. I've been in a lot of group activities, but it's like one of those things where have you ever really been in I wish I could think of a perfect analogy for this. But have you ever been in a situation where let's say you're doing a group activity and within that group activity, whatever it was, you had to kick people out. And there's a certain, I think of like maybe dodgeball is a good example of this. There's a certain point where like in dodgeball, you don't want people to get eliminated. But then there's a certain point where you're like, okay, well, if they're eliminated, well, let's just get this shit over with. Like all of the cool people have left. All of the fun people, like Mars and Venus going to Aquarius is like, it will be cool to be out on the other side, right? Or maybe when you're a kid and you like in school and, you know, once you finish this test, like you just have to finish this test, then you go hang out with the other kids. That's kind of like Mars and Venus going into Aquarius. It's like, get through the test and then you can go outside and play. That's kind of what, in my opinion, this is. But because Saturn and Mercury in Aquarius, this is kind of like, well, let's think of, I'm trying to think of maybe Survivor. I haven't watched the show in forever. And is it Survivor, the one where they eliminate each other off the island? This is kind of like, it gets to the point where being on the island is not fun and being off the island is way better. And Mars and Venus are in Aquarius where it's like, you know what? Fuck this. Like, let's just go out. We're just going to do this. I mean, this is going to be something too, as we experience we're going to have another Mars Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Like we still have some pretty big transits ahead of us. Venus is also going to conjoin Saturn. They're both going to square Uranus, but this Mars, Venus, and Aquarius is like, okay, we busted through the doors. This is Aquarius, right? So now we're trying to stabilize what we have created. I think there's going to be challenges with that because, of course, Mars and Venus are going to square Uranus. But there is this like, it's almost kind of like coasting at this point. If you've ever done road biking, and you've gone up a hill, that's Mars and Venus in Capricorn is going up a hill. Then once you get to the top of that hill, I wouldn't necessarily say you're coasting down because if you've ever been road biking, you go down a hill, it's like euphoric. It's so much fun. That's Mars and Venus in Pisces later on in April. This is like, you're not going uphill, but you're not going downhill. Now it's about keeping that consistency. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing as we get into Saturday night and we go into Sunday. Then the moon will also go into Taurus and square Mars and Venus, which, okay, this is going to be really interesting. Think about January 6th. Not about the insurrection thing. The biggest thing with it, though, was what was ironic about January 6th of the insurrection thing was like Mars had entered Taurus and squared Jupiter and Saturn, like right when that happened. We're going to have the moon enter Taurus and square Mars and Venus as they enter Aquarius. That energy of like big shift over, like what I thought was really funny about the insurrection thing was like, it was like, we finally got to the election. We finally got to them actually doing the thing. We finally get there. And then, of course, fucking, you know, we have to have some fucking bullshit happen. That's kind of like this, where it's like you finally get to the other side and the moon's going to go into Taurus, square Mars and Venus, where, let's say, for example, if you're doing let's say you're a kid, you have to do the STAR test. That's what we had to do. You're doing the STAR test. You just want to go out and hang out with everybody. You finally get that done. Let's say you kind of even half-ass it, get rid of it, get it done. And then you go out only to realize like nothing's going on out there. Like this is kind of like the moon going into Taurus, squaring Mars and Venus. You're like, oh, like maybe that was a little bit more romanticized in your head. But the moon going into Taurus, squaring Mars and Venus and Aquarius is also maybe like the moon in Taurus wants to relax. The moon in Taurus, you know, wants to get comfortable, but it's going to square Mars and Venus and Aquarius. Nope, not happening. There's a lot of themes that are going to be repeated with this conjunction around the lockdowns and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which was pretty much the end of 2020 going into January of 2021. There's a lot of themes coming back to that. I mean, the sun's also still conjoining Jupiter at this time. So there's all this newness and this refreshness, right? We're definitely moving on from the old, but I think there's this sense of like, all right, I want to keep consistent, but you're not going to be comfortable doing it. And you know, I get frustrated because people are like, Cameron, when is it going to get good? Well, here's the thing. You can be let's say you're Jeff Bezos and you run the literal fucking world, and you have 200 whatever billion dollars and you can literally do whatever. I guarantee you Jeff Bezos still has shit. I guarantee you most of his days are shit. And he probably only looks at the negative too. I can't imagine him being the most positive person, to be honest. I'm sure he has different understandings of what positivity is. But I kind of look at it as like, unless you're like, I don't know, like we're going to find ways to be negative. We're always going to find problems. And I think, well, what I kind of like about the astrology and showing where the problems are, it's like sometimes it's bigger life stuff. You know, we can have all the perfect transits that we want, and you could still have a bad day. Totally depend on your attitude. Totally depends on your attitude. But that Sunday pretty much is, there's actually a lot of things going on. Sunday, Mars will go into Aquarius, Venus will go into Aquarius, Moon will go into Taurus, square Mars and Venus. Venus passes Mars, and the Moon conjoins Uranus. Mars going to Aquarius, we're going rogue. Venus going to Aquarius, we're going rogue. Moon, it just seems like I always think of rogue with Aquarius, right? And that's for better or for worse, right? I always think of like the people getting like the cancel culture stuff right now. We're going to get to a point where there are more people canceled than there are like people not canceled. And eventually everyone's going to be on that other side. So this is the thing. This is kind of like, there's eventually going to be this thing where it's cooler to be on the other side of something. And I feel like that's where this is. But there's this Mars, Venus, and Aquarius of like, got to do things differently. And when you say differently, because I think what's funny about the word different in Aquarius is it's a fixed sign, right? So it's very like, I always think of the word counterculture with Aquarius. Well, let's think about the last time Saturn was Aquarius was actually in the early 90s. This was 91, 92, 93. And what I thought was really interesting during that time was in the election of 93, when was Bill Clinton elected? Was that 92? Yeah, I think it was 92. I don't know. I'm all types. Oh, it was 92. I think it was 92. During the presidential election of 1992, that was one of the last times we had a third-party candidate get the highest amount of votes. It was Ross Perot. And during that time of that election it was Bill Clinton versus, George H.W. Bush. And a lot of people were kind of over the, Republican Reagan era of politics. We had the war started in Afghanistan, the Gulf War, stuff like that. Well, not Afghanistan. There was just the Gulf War. And what was going on? What's that country next to Iraq? The Gulf War. People didn't really know what to do with politics though, and they voted, and like Ross Perot got like the biggest third party vote. And what's interesting about that is if you know anything about American politics, and like we're not a third party country, we're a divided two party country. And I think about Saturn, and what's interesting about Ross Perot is that there was this kind of, and I think also too the next election will be probably one of the biggest third party turnouts, because there's this sense of like going against the grain and finding other alternatives. And I look at Mars, Venus, Saturn, Mercury is like, we're really looking for alternative means of things. When you think about Saturn, Aquarius is like, there's a level of information that authority wants you to have. And then there's, the rest of the other stuff. And there's stuff that you kind of have to go outside of the line of thinking to learn and to understand. Again, well, it's just one of those things where really Saturn and Aquarius is, if you want to live within the walls, you're going to have an authority figure that you're going to have to listen to, and you're going to have limitations to where you can only go out so far. But if you want to be out on the other side, you're not going to be let in. You're going to have to figure out stuff for yourself. And I think that's going to be a theme that continues as Pluto goes into Aquarius for the next like 20 years. That's why I'm kind of saying it right now. And we're just seeing that much more in our personal lives in a smaller way. And I think as Mars and Venus are in Aquarius, again, we're just kind of moving on to a different subject. This is, I can't believe, an hour and 15 minutes. Wow. Wasn't expecting that. But here's the thing. Let's go to next week. Nothing's going on next week, guys. Mercury goes into Pisces. Like, literally, that's it. That might suck only because I think about 2020, and when all of the lockdown stuff was first going on, I was watching the press conferences every day because there was a Mercury retrograde conjoined Neptune in Pisces, and it was awful. And I don't remember if you remember this, but it was like Fauci and Trump would literally say opposing things every day, and they would flip on everything every day during this Mercury and Pisces retrograde. So I think with Mercury going to Pisces, just don't expect any clear information, but at least there's not a retrograde, right? But there's nothing going on next week. There's really nothing going on next week. It is this week. And I'm glad I spent an hour and 15 minutes talking about this week because I don't think this is a small week at all. This is why I said, I thought it was funny. Someone's like, yeah, talk about a small week last week. It's like, yeah, that almost terrifies me more. That like we already had a big thing in the week that nothing happened, because that means the big week where big things happen might be even bigger. But we'll see. I've been wrong. I've been wrong before. So, we'll see what happens. But I think this week is a lot for a lot of people. What has been going on since November, since December, since January, since February? We're moving on from all of this, and it's on to something else. And I think a lot of it is about, like, again, facing fears. And sometimes it takes kind of, those eyes rolling in the back of your head to kind of overcome that shit. But once you do, you know it. And again, I just think the biggest thing, my biggest piece of advice, I think, is with the Mars-Pluto thing is, like, just knowing, like, for example, if you're fighting someone, if you got to conquer something, you have a responsibility to know where to take it. And I think that's really the biggest thing to worry about this week, is things are going to get to an extreme no matter what. And I think it's much more about you facing that fear. It's like Mars-Pluto at the exalted degree. You need to you're going to see some real shit, and you're going to see some real life shit. And that's pretty much all there is to it. You're just going to have to get over it. I know that's probably not what a lot of people want to hear, but this has been a long time coming. Again, there's stuff that could feel very tantalizing in the moment, but when you have a couple months to prepare for it, I don't know. It's not that bad when you actually face it and you swallow the pill. So anyway, that's what I have for you guys this week. I hope I was able to elaborate, anything good for people. This is a really big week. There's just a lot going on in the world right now. And I think the biggest thing too is that this is America's Pluto return. So this isn't just like, oh, you're going to have you're going to see the power dynamic in this world shift, starting this week. I mean, we already did see it start with Russia invading, Ukraine, but this isn't a one-day event. This is a multiple year event. And I always think about birth charts as you were just born in a moment. And like, this is a very intense moment in this world. And so you're going to see that, played out in the astrology. You're going to see that played out in your own personal life. So I just don't think there's really any, I don't necessarily think this will be a small week for anybody, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But anyway, I'll go ahead and end it with that. I really love and appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, and I'll see you next week.